Welcome back to Fox and Friends for a Friday. What lessons, new lessons, are we learning in the wake of that foiled airline terror plot?
Jeff Beatty is with us from Boston, a former CIA counter-terrorism case officer and the president of TotalSecurity.us. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning.
So tell us, what are the new things, the new components of this case that perhaps we hadn't been expecting or hadn't properly planned for before this?
Well, Edie, I think the good news is that we have properly planned for many things. If there is a silver lining to the tragedy of September 11th, we're seeing the manifestation of that here. Programs that the British and the Americans used to defeat this attack include programs such as monitoring of the Internet, tracking of international finances, perhaps even monitoring of international phone calls. So these programs that we've heard about, and in some cases are controversial, are the types of programs that have been a post-9/11 success and led to this great cooperation and victory.
You just touched on it, post-9/11 success. Certainly this is a victory in the war on terror by thwarting this. But, Jeff, you know what? We just barely got it because we understand they were in the rehearsal stage. They were about to make the cell operational within the next couple of days and try to do a dry run either today or tomorrow.
Well, Steve, you're right. And well, you know your terrorism. I mean, we divide terrorism into different phases. You basically have the targeting phase, then you have casing and surveillance, then rehearsals, and then the actual attack. And I think what we saw was the British, who had been on this for several months, played it out as long as they could so that they could identify as many different players, find as many members of this cell. But for those of you that have actually attended a dress rehearsal of anything, you know sometimes when you're looking at a dress rehearsal, you don't know the difference between that and the actual play, or the actual attack. So the Brits, not wanting to wait too long, decided to probably grab it right now at the end of the casing phase, right before the dry runs, and I just think it's an excellent example of how an operation ought to be done.
Jeff, it also seems as though the British had some people inside, deep into this cell. As good as the surveillance is and the technology is, and it's good to have experience, you had to have someone on the inside. They did.
You're so right, Brian. I mean, this highlights what the British do well, what I call low-tech, high-concept, good old human intelligence. These are the tools that the United States unfortunately dismantled in the 90s, tools that if we had kept them in place, we had them in place under Reagan and Casey. If we had kept them in place, we would have had a better chance at preventing our own disaster on September 11th. But these human intelligence tools are absolutely critical to complement the technology. And that's why the Americans with their technology and some good human intelligence, and the British with this great way to go about operations, make a tremendous team. And I'm glad to see a success.
We're also seeing two different schools of thought. One is the bin Laden Big Bang attack, and the other is the Zarqawi small but deadly attacks. The big ones have been foiled recently. Do you think this will force a change in the tactics?
I think it's very likely, Edie, that it will change the tactics. The terrorists learn from every operation. The threat will morph. There have been two schools of thought up until this point, pretty much dominated by bin Laden, who wants to go for the home run, the thousands of casualties, each attack more spectacular than the last success. But then there's the other school of thought, the Zarqawi, thank God he's gone right now, but it's kind of death by 1,000 wounds school of thought, where it would be package bombs against transit systems, against children, like we saw the attack in Beslan, Russia, against the school.
Hey, you know what, Jeff?
We have to contend with that.
Right.
Okay.
Let's finish that thought and talk to you right after this short time.
Still with us, former CIA guy Jeff Beatty. He's up in Boston. Hey, Jeff, we're learning more about the suspected bomb that these guys were trying to get on board, a liquid bomb, and apparently made out of a number of components. You put it all together, and then you can light it off, start it with something like an iPod or a one-time camera or anything like this. This is something that Al-Qaeda's used a lot in the past.
Well, you're right. Al-Qaeda has been, again, we talked a few minutes ago about that phrase, low-tech but high concept. Al-Qaeda has been very slick. What they've been trying to do is they've studied what our bomb dogs, for example, can detect. And they've been out there using explosives like TATP, HMTD, which are explosives that were developed, some cases, up to 100 years ago. But they were a little volatile, and so we moved away from them. And our current set of bomb dogs are only now getting trained up on the explosives that Al-Qaeda has used. And these are very easily made, Steve. You can make these using common components and make them in a bathtub, if you will. And they don't need to be imported across our borders. They're actually something that can be made here and then masked and put into common household items which would be difficult for people to detect. That's why we're doing what we're doing now at the airports and limiting gels and liquids.
Exactly right. All right, Jeff Beatty, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right.